To welcome our keynote speaker for today, Mr. Brian Motherway from the International Energy Agency. He is the head of Energy Efficiency Division and also the coordinator for the Global Commission on People-Centered Clean Energy Transitions. Well, I have not come across a job description that is as specific as it comes over here. Brian is going to talk to us about how can innovations overcome the bridges of humanitarian organizations, but also how does IEA see the role of humanitarian organizations in tackling specifically the global energy challenge. Brian, the word is yours.
Great, thank you, and thank you for the invitation to join you today. It's a great pleasure to be joining you. I'm here in Paris, where the sun is out, even though it's on a cold day, and I hope it's wherever you are, you're experiencing a little bit of sunshine at least. So thank you for the invitation to join you. I'm very pleased to be part of this conversation, and I look forward to learning from all of you in the discussions as well. Let me just spend a few minutes giving you an overview from our perspective of energy, climate issues, and particularly the humanitarian and people dimensions of that, which is clearly on many governments' minds at the moment. We work for governments all over the world to help them understand their energy and climate issues and how to put better policies in place to tackle energy from the point of view of social and economic development, but also more and more now with a focus on clean energy transitions, which has become a really fantastic arena for momentum globally, even in the last year or two, as we see so many major economies stepping up to putting a stronger focus on decarbonization of their energy systems in shorter timeframes. This has many implications in socio-economic terms, but it also will require much stronger concerted action than we have seen to date. Pledging to decarbonize one's society is different from doing it, and that's the point we're at now, where we need to see the action that will follow. Next slide, please. In particular, we saw emissions from the energy system fall dramatically last year. A historic decline in CO2 emissions related to energy use because of many bad things, not the kind of actions we would like to see in order to drive CO2 reductions globally, in terms of people experiencing lockdowns, people experiencing health challenges, economic challenges. And then the real question now is what happens next? And I can tell you that our data shows already that emissions are rebounding. Energy demand is returning. We see coal use going up, we see oil use going up, we see gas use going up, and we see emissions going back up. So without a much stronger focus, particularly by policymakers, on sustainable recovery policies, we will see emissions rising again. We have not turned the corner yet unless policy action becomes firmer, and that happens very quickly. Next slide, please. In many ways, the poorest feel the worst effects of the pandemic. And in one dimension that I will focus on from my remarks today is in having access to energy to make people's lives better. I think we all appreciate that access to energy that is affordable, secure, and of course clean is essential to life, whether literally and also in terms of well-being, economic opportunities, educational opportunities. And yet we still see hundreds of millions of people who do not have access to any energy at all. First of all, let's look at electricity. Having seen a turn at around 2013, where we started to see a decline in the numbers of people without access to basic electricity, we actually saw that go in the opposite direction in 2020 in Africa, where we saw the number of people without access to basic electricity of any kind return on an upward path to about 600 million people with no access at all. Next slide, please. And let me explore a little bit by what we mean by access. I don't want to get too technical here, but there are different definitions about how much energy it takes to power one's life. And when we talk about basic access to energy, we talk about a kind of a package of living, where you could imagine that you have some lighting, you have a refrigerator, you maybe have a fan, mobile phone charger, access to a television. In numerical terms, that adds up to about 1,200 kilowatt hours of electricity a year, which, by the way, is about 40% of the typical household in the Netherlands uses today. If you were to add air conditioning to that, which I'll return to, you would double the electricity demand required to empower that. Now, with a focus on energy efficiency, which is, of course, where we focus, you can dramatically reduce energy needs. So when we think about energy access, we often think about solar panels, we think about generation, but we should remember that technology innovation on the demand side, in terms of, in other words, extremely efficient light bulbs, extremely efficient televisions, extremely efficient refrigerators, can really enhance the opportunity for access because it brings the energy need dramatically down. I would note in passing the goal for access for refugees is, of course, much smaller than that. And it gives you a sense of scale here in terms of what really basic access looks like rather than more enhanced access. But it also shows you that there are many different entry points in terms of giving people access to energy and the good things that comes with that. And therefore, of course, there are many different technology and policy solutions to provide that electricity access to people, which we can see on the next slide, please. So you can imagine now the technology is really empowering different ways of thinking about access to electricity for remote regions in Africa in particular, where that's not possible today. If we could move on to the next slide, please. And you can, without getting into too technical, the classical way to bring electricity to people is to run wires from the mains electricity system into villages, into homes. That's happening in many parts of the world, particularly there's been a very major campaign in India in the last few years, parts of Asia, certain parts of Africa. Beyond that, we don't always need to think about bringing the mains grid. You can think about local small grids, particularly powered by solar power now. So you can think about a village level system or a community level system, but more and more what we call off grid, which is a home level solution, where you think about how do you provide electricity access on a home by home basis, particularly in remote areas where you can combine renewable energy with very efficient technologies to really make that possible in ways that just didn't exist even a few years ago. And let's look at an example of that in the next slide, please. There are many companies working like the one I'm going to mention, but BeBox is an interesting example where they provide in a number of African countries effectively a rental package where you can go down to the local store and sign up for literally a box that you take home. There's a solar panel you put up, there's a battery that stores energy, and with it comes lights, a very efficient television, a phone charger, possibly a radio, depending on what package you sign up for. And you don't own that package. You're effectively renting the service from the basis of a monthly fee, which is paid via your mobile phone, via digital payments. And it allows you to have a certain amount of clean and affordable electricity access and the good things that comes with that. This would not even have been possible 5 years ago, never mind the energy technologies, but the digital technologies to control that, to do the maintenance, to do the payments is really just emerging now. And therefore, the potential for this kind of rollout to almost for parts of Africa to leapfrog what we do in Europe, what is done in other parts of the world, which is much more wires-based, much more physical-based. We can go to the next generation of these standalone solutions driven by the latest technology in solar panels, in batteries, and in really, really efficient devices that use far less energy than we would have traditionally associated with them. Next slide, please. I focused on electricity, but let me talk about some other dimensions of access as well. And of course, clean cooking is actually, in numerical terms, a much bigger issue globally, where there's close to between 2 and 3 billion people who still rely on what we call traditional cooking solutions, which is basically going out and collecting firewood. This is usually done by women. It often takes several hours a day, and it involves not only collecting that firewood, but bringing it home and cooking in extremely unhealthy environments where burning traditional firewood in a small home in an inefficient or unsecure stove leads to major health issues associated with indoor pollution that kills literally millions of people in the developing world every year, as well as having major implications for the availability of women for the workforce, for the availability of girls and boys for education, and for the environmental impact of those polluting fuels, those carbon emitting fuels. So clean cooking has so many important dimensions socially, economically, and environmentally, and that's why it's a major focus in many areas. Let me just give you one example of a program on the next slide, please, where we are working with local partners in Morocco. And this trial actually just started this week, where a lot of people rely on either conventional or old-fashioned traditional fuels in Morocco for their cooking, or they use butane, which is a form of natural gas, but that is quite expensive. It's imported. It involves a lot of public subsidies. So the government is interested in moving people towards cleaner electricity-based solutions. So we have actually just started some trials where people are being given electric cooking devices that are compatible with Moroccan traditions of cooking. So we now have people in their homes cooking traditional Moroccan dishes with these new cooking stoves, pressure cookers, other devices, and seeing what kind of social acceptance they get, what kind of impact they have on people's ways of cooking. This has been done elsewhere, such as the examples you see featuring a cookbook from Kenya that looks at how to cook traditional Kenyan types of food in new technologies that are electricity-based rather than fire-based. Excuse me. If we could go to the next slide, please. One of the dimensions I want to mention of access is beyond very basic access, where we're talking about people going from zero access to clean modern energy to at least some. A major component that has social and environmental implications is what happens in the next tier when people go beyond the basic energy use to start using more energy, as we would see in many parts of the world happening now, particularly in Asia. And it's worth noting that cooling is a real battleground for this issue, where there's close to 3 billion people who live in zones that are hot and humid nearly all the time. And of course, due to global warming, they're getting hotter and more humid. And of course, as those families become a little bit richer, it's very common for them to want to invest in air conditioning. This makes people healthier, it makes homes more comfortable, it makes schools and work environments more comfortable. It's a very natural step once it becomes affordable to people. But it has major implications for electricity use and therefore for greenhouse gas emissions and for environmental questions generally. Right now, in certain parts of the world like Japan, United States, parts of Saudi Arabia and other countries, almost every home has an air conditioner. And they use it quite a lot, of course. In other parts of the world, including in India, for example, only 6 or 7% of people have air conditioners today. But as the economy develops, as people grow richer, we expect that to completely explode in terms of ownership of air conditioners. And if they buy inefficient, poor performing air conditioners that are available today, the stress on the electricity system and the stress on the environment will be truly overwhelming. And that's why this needs to be a major policy focus to think about more efficient devices, cleaner technologies, and of course, cleaner sources of electricity that can help that kind of social and economic development happen, but in much more sustainable and cleaner ways. Next slide, please. So I have focused mostly on bringing energy to people and therefore bringing the good things that energy can provide to people. But of course, as we move towards decarbonizing societies all over the world and moving to clean energy systems, there are many social dimensions we need to think about, including what happens to people who lose their jobs in coal mining, what happens to people who lose their jobs in sectors such as manufacturing internal combustion engines for cars, what happens when we see resource shifts where certain resources such as oil and gas no longer have value or no longer become acceptable in our societies. When we introduce new policies, which include maybe carbon taxes or pricing energy differently, what are the distributional effects? What are the effects on poorer people of those kind of policies, particularly the most poor and marginalized people in the transition from the way we do energy systems today to the way we need to do them urgently in the future? So we are looking at these issues with governments, making them understand that all of these issues need attention for their own imperatives and for their own value, but also to ensure that clean energy transitions have a chance of success. If you don't bring people with you on these pathways, public support will not be maintained, and we will not be able to deliver the kind of transformative program of change we need to deliver in the next decade or two if we are really to get to grips with the climate change crisis we are facing. Next slide, please. So at the moment, I just want to let you know that we are engaging with countries right around the world through what we call the Global Commission for People-Centered Clean Energy Transitions. This brings together energy and climate ministers from every part of the world, as well as some key stakeholders in civil society, youth sector, experts in labor, experts in energy access, where we're exchanging best practice in understanding how can we make our plans to transform our global energy systems more people-centered, more equitable, and more inclusive. and in that ways bring the benefits of these transitions to people, make people's lives better, make people's economic opportunities better, reduce air pollution in cities, increase access to basic and more advanced clean modern energy, and also maintain public support for these transitions in ways that people see that they are benefiting from them, that they will continue to benefit from them, and they are willing to give their governments the social license that's required for the kind of radical changes we're going to see in our energy systems in the coming decades. Next slide, please. So just before I close, I want to give you some of the themes of the issues we're thinking about. I'd love to hear your feedback on any of these or to discuss any of these issues in more details. But we're seeing an emerging set of themes that are key for the future of energy and climate. And these issues will affect every part of the world in terms of the way we change, where we get our energy from, how we use it, how we design our infrastructure from transport to business to our homes. All of them have social implications for people all over the world. And so therefore we are trying to work with governments to help them understand how to maximize the economic and the social benefits for people, for their citizens around the world, keeping a focus on jobs, keeping a focus on how these programs will affect workers and communities, particularly those who might be affected negatively. And of course, how to keep a focus on key questions such as energy access, equity, gender equality, social inclusion, treatment of marginalized communities. All of these elements need to be central to clean energy transitions in every part of the world. And I must say, we see a huge momentum among governments, very keen and very committed to focusing on these issues, and therefore very willing to work with each other to explore the kind of best practice, the kind of experience that we've learned already, good and bad, to see how we can make our clean energy transitions more people-centered and therefore more beneficial to citizens around the world, and of course, more likely to succeed. So thank you for your attention. I hope that's been a useful overview. I'd be very keen to hear your comments or to answer any questions you may have. Back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Brian, thank you very much. I made some notes about your presentation. So a couple of things that stand out for us over here. Guys, is the mic still working? Okay, all right. A couple of things that stood out for us. Firstly, regarding the importance of policymakers that you touched upon. The second thing is the efficiency of electrical devices, mainly the air conditionings that you talked about. And thirdly, the collaborative efforts that are needed from different organizations. And you ended with the slides of the themes, so that was also very interesting to see, because right after this, we're going to have a panel discussion. And we're very curious to see which aspects of those themes they will highlight more. But Brian, also you mentioned about the pilot in Morocco. It was very interesting to see the cooking devices. Can you tell us what kind of results are you hoping to see from that project?
I think it's a good example of where clean energy transitions sometimes suffer from being a little technocratic, because you put energy policymakers in the room and they understand how much energy does this new device use and what kind of system does it fit into technologically. But what will really decide whether they succeed or fail on the ground is how people feel them when they use them. Does the food taste the same? Do their habits have to change to use them? So it's really a very good example of how the social aspects of this policy are far more important than the technological aspects. In many ways, and I think this is true across the board, the technology aspects are the easy bit. It's the social acceptance, it's the behavior change, it's the willingness to change dimensions that will be far more crucial in deciding whether these types of policies succeed or not.
Thank you very much, Brian.